Hey everyone, it's Hans, and welcome back. Despite everything 2020 has thrown our way, and it really has been a lot, an all-new generation of gaming is finally here, and therefore excitement levels are at an all-time high. If you've been following the channel, you know that I've reviewed the Xbox Series X. Well, today I'm really happy to say that I'll be reviewing the PlayStation 5 and talking about everything to do with the system in terms of design, games, performance, and whether or not it is worth your moolah. Now with that said, I do want to make note that this is not going to be a comparison video between the two systems. This is purely a PlayStation 5 review and whether or not this particular system is worthy of fitting into your lifestyle. So let's do it. As many of you know, I did have a chance to unbox the PlayStation 5. If you haven't seen that video, by all means go and check it out, as I do have a good look at the base and how it's set up and so on and so forth. With that in mind, the packaging is fairly standard fare for a console, with the exception of the fact that the disc version has a white box and the digital edition of the console has a black box. So whenever you do get your console, in the box is an HDMI cable, power cable, USB-A to USB-C cable, Dual Sense controller, base plate, and instructional manuals. Now, in terms of the design of the PlayStation 5, it is truly divisive. You're either really going to like it or you just aren't. Now, in my experience, when I first saw the console during Sony's announcement, I really didn't know how I felt about it. Now that I've had it, I can honestly say it's growing on me. I wasn't initially enamored with it, but over time, looking at those like Batman-like flaps that open up on the top, and just the overall waviness of the shape and how different and unusual it is, I really like it. I actually really do. Now, I have said this before and I will say it again, the design of the PlayStation 5 is a statement. It implies that you are a PlayStation 5 owner. You've bought this machine and you want people to see it. It has a very eye-catching design. The kind of design where people are going to walk in and be like, hey, what's that? And you'll be like, it's my PlayStation 5. Now, in terms of the white and black contrast, I actually really like it. The white panels are very premium and they feature that really great PlayStation sigil logo pattern that is also on the DualSense controller. Something else that's also really great about the system are the LED lights. Now, they very much emulate what Sony did with the PlayStation 4, but this time around, the lights kind of bounce off the major front flaps of the system, and it gives it a very futuristic and sometimes ethereal feel. And I really like that. It's very cool, very different, very unusual, and it really works for the PlayStation 5. With that said, I do feel that the black shiny plastic bit, which extends all the way from the front of the console through to the top, is the weakest part of the design. Not only does it come across as looking a little bit cheap, but because it's so shiny, it's a hectic fingerprint magnet, as well as the fact that it scratches super easily, even with a soft cloth. Now granted, you're not going to see the scratches unless the light hits it in a certain way, but it is something to take note of. So it's just a little bit weird that this portion of the console is so at odds with the rest of the premium feel of the plastics and other construction quality of the console and its DualSense controller. With the design of the console in mind, let's have a quick overview of the ports featured on the PlayStation 5. So on the front, there is a USB-A 10GB port, USB-C 10GB port, an eject button if you have the disc model, and the power button. That's about it. Now, if you follow the black strip all the way through to the back of the device, you'll find a Kensington lock, two USB-A 10GB ports, gigabit Ethernet, HDMI out, and a power port, as well as all of the vents which ensure that the system is well ventilated. So it goes without saying, the PlayStation 5 is massive. If you have it in the vertical orientation, it is 38.8 centimeters tall, 8 centimeters in width, and about 26 centimeters deep. Now, bear in mind, these dimensions are without the base stand. Now, if you do happen to use the base stand, which I would recommend, you should add an additional 2 to 5 centimeters to the width or height of the console, just to make sure that it's going to fit into your entertainment centers. So in terms of the overall shape and size of the console, I will say that it does have a little bit of an edge over the Series X, and this is purely because that console has very much a boxy design, whereas the PlayStation 5 has, in a certain respect, been designed like a traditional VCR or set-top box setup. So in this sense, if you have the console horizontally, it only requires about 12 to 15 centimeters in height. Therefore, it should be able to fit into normal entertainment centers in a very traditional manner, which is pretty good, and it works for the system if you have the space. Now, with that said, it is generally very quiet. Depending on where you put it, you might hear a slight whirring noise, and that's really just the fan kicking in order to keep the system cool. But honestly speaking, compared to previous PlayStations, this thing is near silent. Something that you should maybe think about is the fact that the back of the system does get quite warm. Now, I managed to feel this because obviously for the review period, I've had to move the console around and test it in different locations and on different TVs and so on and so forth. And I found that the HDMI cables and the dongle that I was using for my headset actually became very, very warm to the touch. A lot hotter than I thought that they would be. Now, this in general isn't much of an issue, and rather my advice to you would be, if you are using external storage, which we'll speak about in just a little bit, rather ensure that whatever device you're using is kept away from the main back vents and maybe put towards the side of the console. In terms of setting up the PlayStation 5, it's a fairly easy and straightforward experience with one or two niggles along the way. So to start, you have to connect the Dual Sense controller, which I thought was a bit weird that it wasn't initially already paired to the system, but hey, this way at least you know the controller is charging and working. Thereafter, you simply follow the prompts to set up the system. Now, in this respect, on the whole, I do like some of the newer additions that Sony has implemented in terms of the setup, such as privacy controls and setting up two-factor authentication, and even installing and downloading games or transferring them from a PS4. I think that all of those additions are great. Something I didn't really like was the fact that it kind of asked me or bombarded me with, do I want to install media apps on my games console? Now, I know a lot of people do use consoles for media, but it's just a bit of a humorous and ironic turn for the PS5, given how when the PS4 and Xbox One initially launched, there was a huge hoopla over the Xbox One's focus on entertainment, and the fact that Sony has this as an option during setup was just a bit humorous to me, I suppose. Overall, though, setup is nice and easy, and if you have the PlayStation app, you simply scan in a QR code and boom, Bob's your uncle. PlayStation is set up and you're good to go. And it takes roughly 15 to 20 minutes for the entire process. Again, depending on what you do, if you are going to be copying over from a PlayStation 4, or if you're going to be installing games at the same time, your process might take a little bit longer. So what is the overall system like? Well, the good news is it's nice and fast. No doubt thanks to the updated internals and that super fast SSD. So from this perspective, turning on the machine from sleep mode takes about 13 seconds, whereas a cold boot is about 25 seconds, and restarting takes about 35 seconds. Okay, so the design and the profile of the system aside, let's have a good look at the brand new PlayStation 5 operating system. Now, anyone who's used a PlayStation 3 or PlayStation 4 will be familiar with the kind of design language that Sony is going with. Now, in terms of PlayStation 5, the new operating system is quite different to the PlayStation 4, but it does retain a very similar feel. From the get-go, you'll notice how games are front and center of the experience, whereby any selected title has a very cool backdrop with a splash image from the game, as well as some really interesting audio that comes directly from the game that it is currently highlighted. In my opinion, the effect is really great, and it's an absolute enhancement over the PlayStation 4. Now, in terms of the design language, it also showcases your most recently used apps and games, all of which appear as a bar near the top of the home screen. Now, going all the way to the right of the screen showcases all of the games you currently own, have installed, or which are available for installation. Unfortunately, at this point in time, there is no way to sort out these titles. You literally can only have them sorted by recently used or by alphabetical letters. In addition to that, you can't, at least right now, create folders in order to organize your games. So these are slight little omissions that I'm pretty sure will be patched in at a later date for the operating system on the PlayStation 5. Now, one of the biggest changes of the OS is the all-new control center. Now, regardless of whether you're in a game or actually in the home screen, pressing the PlayStation button brings up the control center. And this essentially gives you access to all of your most needed settings or options, like seeing who's online, creating a party, changing your voice inputs, and so on and so forth. The nice thing about the control center is it can also be customized. In addition to this, Sony have added an all-new cards system, which works with each individual game, and it is built into the OS. In this sense, it's very much up to developers to program content for these cards, which can be for unlocking new trophies or showing secrets, or maybe even just continuing a game. And what's really cool about it is, initially, the card system was a little bit unusual to get used to, but once you have it, you kind of look at it and you're like, how did I not have this before? It's just a very, very cool thing, and I really hope that developers will continue to support it in future titles. Unlike the PlayStation 4, holding in the PS button doesn't bring up any other menus. So what this effectively means is that anyone used to the PS4 might have to spend just a little bit longer getting to certain things like rebooting or turning off the machine than they would have on the older system. But honestly speaking, there are far more improvements in this OS that I'm more than happy to do those extra steps than go back to the way things were. Now, something nice with the control center is that it also gives you access to the game switcher. And what this essentially allows you to do is basically switch to any other game that you've previously played on the system, up to I think it's about 2 or 3 games or apps. Now, something to take into consideration about this feature is that it doesn't work like Quick Resume on the Series X, which is initially how I thought it worked. Basically, what I'm saying here is, if you use the game switcher, it quits the game you're playing and it loads up a new game. So there isn't some kind of a caching system where you play a game, it saves the state, and then when you go back to the game later, it just loads back to where you were. Rather, every single game has to load from scratch, regardless of whether you're using the game switcher or if you go to the home screen and select the game manually that way. Although initially that might seem like a pain, the good news is the PlayStation 5 is incredibly quick, especially for PlayStation 5 games. I noticed that most titles like Miles Morales, Demon's Souls, Sackboy, and even Astro's Playroom had near instantaneous loading times. Sure, loading screens are not exactly gone, but on the whole, I mean, waiting 10 seconds to get into a game really isn't a long time. Now, in terms of the overall storage of the system, it is worth noting that the PS5 only ships with an 825 gig SSD. Of which only around about 667 gigabytes usable for games and media on the system. Now, at first, this doesn't seem like much of an issue, but given the size of many games, it does mean that PlayStation 5 owners are going to have to be cognizant of the fact that they may run out of storage. Now, the good news about the storage issue is that if you have external storage, you can store your PlayStation 4 games on there. Whether that's an external USB SSD or an external USB HDD, the fact of the matter is you can store your old PS4 games there. Unfortunately, and at least right now in the current incarnation of the system, you cannot store PS5 games anywhere else except for the internal SSD. Now, it is a bit of an issue, and I'm pretty sure Sony will at some point in the future patch the software to allow us to at least move the games to external storage when we're not using those PlayStation 5 games. Now, in terms of games, there are quite a few for the system, both announced and currently available. In terms of the launch window, I will admit that I do like the fact that there are at least 4 proper exclusives for the PlayStation 5. Most notably, Astro's Playroom, which comes with every single system, it's built in. Sackboy, A Big Adventure, which is a really good platformer. Spider-Man Miles Morales, which really just takes everything that the original Spider-Man game did and just improves on it in so many ways. And of course, the highly sought after and absolutely excellent Demon's Souls remake. These 4 games alone basically almost fill a quarter of the current SSD storage, but they are so worth enjoying and playing, and they really showcase what the PlayStation 5 is capable of, at least right now during the launch window. And they really are very cool titles to be like, hey, check my PS5, look at what it can do. And I really do enjoy that, other than the fact that they really are great games as well. Now, in addition to that, it is worth talking about how the PlayStation 4 really did define the generation with really incredible games. Now, the good news for PS5 owners is Sony is starting something new with a PS Plus collection, which is essentially a free collection of really good ace hitters from the PlayStation 4 generation, which are available for free to PS Plus subscribers on PlayStation 5. So now what's great about this is that if you're new to the PlayStation family, you basically have an instant collection of games. It also serves as a really cool means of being able to still enjoy your system while we wait for games to be released on it. I must also make mention of the fact that the PlayStation 5 does support HDMI 2.1, and that means that it can support frame rates up to 120 frames per second, and those games that do support it run incredibly well. So in terms of games, and with the new generation, it is expected that games will look good. And for the most part, both of the next generation consoles do deliver on this part. However, we are at that point of diminishing returns in terms of just how good games can look. So it's worthwhile pointing out that new experiences or unusual experiences are kind of where it might be a differentiating factor moving forward. Now, of course, I've mentioned all of this without talking about the Dual Sense, and there is a very good reason for this, and that is because the Dual Sense is the absolute best part of the PlayStation 5. This controller is quite simply fantastic. I've mentioned before how I haven't really been a big fan of the DualShock controllers, mainly because they felt a little bit small, they weren't really very weighty, and just the overall shape, in my personal opinion, wasn't as comfortable as controllers from Xbox. Well, everyone, the Dual Sense controller for the PlayStation 5 is absolutely phenomenal. And I haven't even spoken about what the control does yet, but just from a general perspective, it has an excellent weight and it just feels absolutely incredible in the hands. But where the DualSense absolutely excels and where it gives the PlayStation 5 the edge over the competition is in the brand new features it brings to the table, namely with haptic feedback and adaptive triggers. Now, these aspects are a little bit difficult to explain over video, but I'm going to try my best because they really, truly are features that need to be felt to really be understood. Now, in terms of haptic feedback, this isn't something new. The Nintendo Switch actually has it in their controllers, and it's called Rumble HD. Unfortunately, a lot of developers kind of just forgot about it, and I will be honest, that gives me a bit of concern for the DualSense, but I'm really hoping developers do continue to support it, because if they do, the overall sensations that this controller offers really is remarkable. So from a haptic feedback perspective, the controller has enough variation in its motors to allow the controller to vibrate in the most minute of ways. So for example, Astro's Playroom is an absolutely incredible example of everything the DualSense can do. And in this sense, when you're using Astrobot to go around the level, you can actually differentiate between whether he's walking on grass or mud or sand or even ice. And it's just incredible how this controller is able to do that. Now, of course, there are some interesting tricks that they use, such as using the speaker on the DualSense in order to enhance that haptic feedback. But generally speaking, it really is very cool how it works. Now, of course, the haptic feedback on its own is impressive, but where it really shines is where it's used with the adaptive triggers. Now, the triggers are unusual in the sense that they can be fully locked or they can be tightened and changed to give you different experiences depending on what you're currently doing. So a good example of this is how in Astro's Playroom, when you find a Gatling gun, the actual trigger will fight against your fingers with every shot that the Gatling gun takes. Another great example from Astrobot is whereby Astro is in a frog suit, and in order to get it to move around, you have to jump. But in order to jump, you have to use the springs, the coils. And the harder you press on the trigger, the tighter the coil is twisted, eventually releasing it and shooting Astrobot around the screen. Now, what's so impressive about this is that the trigger genuinely feels like a coil. It's so difficult to explain, but it just genuinely feels like it. I don't know, and it's really remarkable because it's a great combination of haptics with adaptive triggers, and I can honestly see a lot of developers hopefully using this in the future. Another great feature of the Dual Sense is that it has a built-in microphone, and this is what it sounds like. And as you can hear, it's actually pretty good given how this is a controller mic. Now, of course, if anyone's going to be using this for multiplayer, you won't be holding the controller up to your face. You'll most likely have it at around about arm's length. And as you can hear, it's still decent, even though it does pick up a lot of reverb in the room. So whether or not this will replace a good headset and mic is still up for debate, but it's pretty cool that it does have the feature. Now, of course, these awesome features in the Dual Sense need support from developers. Now, with that said, and in terms of the games that I was able to test for the system during the review period, only Astrobot really takes advantage of the controller. Now, of course, that game was designed to showcase the controller, but I found it a little bit strange how other games like Sackboy: A Big Adventure, Demon's Souls, or even Spider-Man Miles Morales barely take advantage of everything the Dual Sense has to offer. And I really hope this isn't going to be a trend going forward, because this controller has a lot of potential, and I would hate to see it go to waste. So if you're listening to this, developers, please develop for it because it's well worth doing. So overall, the PlayStation 5 is a fantastic system. It is the best PlayStation currently available. Is it worth your moolah? Well, of course, that depends. If you're an early adopter like me, I'm obviously going to say yes. However, if you're someone who might not have the money for it right now, that's okay. Save, keep your PS4 if that's what you've already got, and play some of the launch titles that are on the PlayStation 5 on your PS4, and get the machine at a later stage. For myself, I really like what the PlayStation 5 brings. In my opinion, the Dual Sense alone is reason enough to upgrade to this machine. Of course, the longevity of the Dual Sense remains to be seen because it really is up to developers to code for it. And I really, really, really hope that they do. So there we go. That's the end of my PlayStation 5 review. If you like my content and you enjoyed this review, you know what to do. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon. Ciao for now.